Thanksgiving dinner was supposed to be safe, familiar, predictable. The turkey was still steaming when my husband stood up, cleared his throat, and smiled like he was about to make a toast. Instead, he said, "I'm selling the house your aunt needs somewhere bigger." For a second, I didn't understand. Neither did our adult children. Forks froze midair. Wine glasses hovered inches from lips. Then he kept talking calmly, efficiently explaining that he was leaving me. For my sister. My own sister, sitting 3 seats down, suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. The room felt too small, too quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I simply stood, walked to my purse, and pulled out an envelope I'd been carrying for weeks. I placed it in front of him and said softly, "If you're making announcements." He looked relieved, curious, almost smug. He had no idea what was inside. Thanksgiving had always been my holiday. I was the one who woke up early to baste the turkey, who argued with the oven like it was a stubborn child, who set the table with the good plates we only used once a year. I liked the ritual. It made life feel stable, organized, even when everything else wasn't. That morning, Mark barely spoke to me. He sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone, nodding occasionally, smiling at messages he didn't share. When I asked him to carry the extra chairs from the garage, he sighed like I was interrupting something important. Lauren arrived just before noon. My sister hugged me tightly, a little too tightly, and complimented our house 3 times in the first 5 minutes. She kept saying how spacious it felt, how lucky we were. I laughed it off, assuming she was just being polite. She'd been going through a rough patch lately. I'd told myself she needed kindness, not suspicion. Our kids, Ethan and Claire, showed up an hour later, bringing noise and life with them. Ethan immediately opened a bottle of wine. Claire kissed my cheek and whispered, "Smells amazing, Mom." For a moment, everything felt normal again. But Mark kept gravitating toward Lauren. Not in an obvious way, nothing anyone could point at and say, "That's wrong," just small things. Standing a little too close, lowering his voice when he spoke to her, sharing looks that lingered a beat too long. I noticed. Of course I did, but I told myself I was imagining it. We sat down to eat just after 4. The table was full, the food abundant, the room warm. Laughter bounced between stories from the kids' jobs, old family jokes, harmless teasing. I watched Mark carve the turkey, his hands steady, his face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. Lauren barely touched her food. She kept glancing at Mark, then at me, then back at her plate. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled quickly and said she just wasn't very hungry. Mark reached for his water glass and didn't let go. I remember thinking it was strange how quiet he suddenly became. He wasn't listening to Ethan's story. He wasn't laughing at Claire's jokes. He was somewhere else entirely, like a man rehearsing lines in his head. That was when I felt it. Not suspicion, not fear. A shift. The kind you feel before a storm breaks when the air changes. When your body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. Mark set his glass down. "I just want to say something," he said, standing up. Everyone looked at him, expecting a toast. I even smiled, waiting for him to thank me for the meal, for the years, for the family we'd built. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and looked around the table like a man about to announce a business deal. And that was the moment, though I didn't know it yet, when my marriage, my family, and my understanding of loyalty all began to collapse at once. "I'm selling the house." Mark's voice cut cleanly through the room. For a second, no one reacted. The words hung in the air like they didn't belong there, like they'd been spoken in the wrong house, at the wrong table. I blinked at him. "What?" He exhaled, as if I'd asked him to repeat something obvious. "The house," he said again. "I've decided to sell it." Claire laughed nervously. "Dad, is this a joke?" Mark shook his head. "No, this isn't a joke." Ethan lowered his fork. "You can't just decide that on Thanksgiving." Mark finally looked at me. Not lovingly, not apologetically, just formally. "Lauren needs somewhere bigger," he said. "She's starting a new chapter. And honestly, Hazel, so am I." The room went silent. I felt my chest tighten, but my voice came out steady. "Why would my sister need our house?" Lauren's face drained of color. She stared at her napkin like it might rescue her. Mark kept going. "We've grown apart," he said. "You and I have been living like roommates for years." I didn't want to keep pretending. Ethan stood up. You're talking about Mom. I know, Mark replied, irritated. And I didn't plan to do this today, but it feels dishonest not to be clear. Claire's eyes filled with tears. Clear about what? Mark paused. Then he said it. I'm leaving Hazel, he said. Lauren and I are together. The words hit the table like broken glass. No, Claire whispered. That's not funny. Lauren finally looked up. Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't deny it. I stared at my sister, at the woman who'd shared my childhood bedroom, my secrets, my wedding day, and waited for her to say something. Anything. She didn't. Ethan slammed his chair back. You expect us to sit here and listen to this? I expect you to be adults, Mark snapped. This doesn't concern you. That's my mother, Ethan said. And that's her sister. Mark turned back to me. I've already spoken to a realtor. Once the house sells, we'll split what's left and move on. Split. As if I hadn't built this life. As if I hadn't paid, planned, sacrificed. Something inside me went very quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for an explanation I already understood. Instead, I pushed my chair back and stood. Mark watched me, tense now. Hazel, sit down, we're not finished. I met his eyes for the first time since he stood up. Oh, I said calmly. I think we are. I walked toward my purse, my hands steady despite the chaos unfolding behind me. And when I turned back to the table, I was holding an envelope. I placed it in front of Mark. If you're making announcements, I said softly. So am I. The envelope looked ordinary. Plain white. No return address. No label. Just my handwriting on the front. Mark's name, written carefully, deliberately. I had chosen that envelope weeks ago, sliding it into my purse the same way someone might carry an umbrella on a cloudy day. Not because it was raining yet, but because I knew it might. Mark stared at it like it had teeth. What is this? He asked. I didn't answer. Lauren shifted in her chair. Hazel, maybe this isn't the time. This is exactly the time, I said, without raising my voice. Ethan folded his arms. Claire wiped her cheeks, watching Mark with a mixture of fear and disgust. The food on the table had gone untouched, cooling, forgotten. Thanksgiving had quietly died between the mashed potatoes and the half-empty wine glasses. Mark slid the envelope closer to himself but didn't open it. Is this some kind of stunt? I almost smiled. No, I said. It's just information. His jaw tightened. About what? About the house, I replied. About me. About what you can and can't do. Lauren's breath hitched. Mark, maybe you should wait. That was the first crack. He glanced at her, annoyed. Wait for what? For, later, she said weakly. This is getting out of hand. I leaned forward, resting my palms on the table. You announced my marriage was over, I said. You announced you were selling my home. I think we're already past out of hand. Mark laughed once, sharp and humorless. You're acting like you've planned something. I met his gaze. Because I have. Silence swallowed the room. For the first time that evening, Mark looked uncertain. Not angry. Not confident. Just cautious. He turned the envelope over, weighing it like it might explode. What is this, Hazel? He demanded. Protection, I said. Clarity. Consequences. Ethan leaned in. Dad, just open it. Lauren shook her head. Don't. That word don't came out of her mouth like a plea. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. This wasn't a romance built on confidence. It was a secret built on stolen ground, and secrets never survive daylight. Mark's fingers slid under the flap. Then he stopped. Why now? He asked me quietly. Why do this in front of everyone? I didn't hesitate. Because you chose the audience, I said. And because I won't be embarrassed in silence. He swallowed. The envelope remained unopened on the table, a thin line between the man who thought he was in control and the truth waiting to correct him. I sat back down slowly, folded my napkin, and looked around the table. Go ahead, I said. Finish your announcement. Mark didn't move. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. He wasn't leading this anymore. People think betrayal is loud. They imagine screaming matches, slammed doors, shattered dishes. But the truth is, betrayal is usually quiet. It arrives in missed glances, in passwords changed without explanation, in a marriage that suddenly feels like a waiting room no one plans to stay in. Mark didn't wake up one morning and fall in love with my sister. It started months earlier when Lauren began coming over, just to talk. She was struggling, she said. Financial stress, loneliness. She needed advice, support, family. I told her she could stay as long as she wanted. I told Mark we should help her. He agreed too quickly. At first, it was innocent enough. Late-night conversations in the kitchen when I'd already gone to bed. Long text messages he dismissed as work. Private jokes I wasn't part of. I noticed, but I didn't accuse. I'd spent 20 years building a marriage on trust. I wasn't about to tear it down over a feeling. But feelings don't disappear just because you ignore them. The bank statements were what finally woke me up. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. Transfers I didn't recognize. When I asked Mark about them, he waved it off. Investments, he said. Planning for our future. Our future. I almost believed him. Until I overheard a phone call one night, Mark's voice low, urgent, saying my sister's name like it was something precious he needed to protect. That was the moment I stopped asking questions. Instead, I started listening. I checked records. Old documents. Deeds I hadn't looked at in years because I trusted the man I'd built a life with. I learned things. Mark clearly hoped I never would. That the house wasn't as simple as he thought. That decisions made early in our marriage mattered more than he realized. That's when I called David Miller. He didn't ask me how I felt. He asked me what I wanted to protect. My home, I said. My children, my dignity. He nodded. Then we'll start there. Sitting at that Thanksgiving table, watching Mark hesitate over the envelope, I remembered David's words clearly. Stay calm. Let him talk. Let him expose himself. Lauren finally broke the silence. Hazel, I never meant for this to happen. End quote. I looked at her for the first time since Mark had stood up. Really looked at her. You didn't mean for what? I asked. To lie? To sneak? To sit at my table and plan a future that erased me? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't plan it. No, I said quietly. You participated in it. Mark straightened, irritation flashing across his face. This isn't fair. You're acting like victims don't have choices. I laughed once softly, bitterly. Oh, we do, I said. That's the point. He finally opened the envelope halfway, then stopped again. His hands weren't steady anymore. What did you do? He asked. I leaned back in my chair. I prepared. For what? Claire whispered. For exactly this, I said. Mark looked at the kids, searching for allies. He found none. I didn't cheat at you, he said defensively. I fell out of love. You fell into convenience, I replied, with someone who thought my life was available just because she shared my blood. Lauren flinched. I loved you, she said, barely audible. I met her gaze. You loved the version of my life you thought you could take. The room felt heavy now, not chaotic but weighted. The kind of silence that comes when truth has finished arriving and no one knows where to put it. Mark folded the envelope closed again. I'll deal with this later, he said, pushing it away slightly. We don't need lawyers tonight. That's where you're wrong, I said. Because tonight is when you decided to make everything public. I stood again, calmer than I'd ever felt. You thought you were selling a house, I continued. What you actually did was give up control. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because for the first time since I'd known him, he wasn't certain of the outcome. And that uncertainty, that pause, that was mine. Mark didn't plan to open the envelope that night. I could tell. He kept sliding it an inch away from himself, then pulling it back, like a man negotiating with something he didn't understand. His confidence, the same confidence that had carried him through his announcement, had thinned into irritation, then into something closer to fear. Let's finish dinner, he said finally. We can talk about this later. No, Ethan said. You don't get later. Claire nodded. You made this public. Finish it. Mark looked at me. Hazel, do you really want to do this in front of the kids? I held his gaze. You already did. His fingers trembled as he tore open the envelope. The sound was small, barely noticeable. But the moment it happened, everything changed. He pulled out the first document and frowned. What is this? He asked. Read it, I said. He scanned the page quickly at first, then more slowly. His brow furrowed. He flipped to the second page, then the third. His breathing changed, not fast, not shallow but deliberate, like his body was bracing for impact. Lauren leaned forward. Mark? He didn't answer her. Claire stood and moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Dad, this says the house is legally protected. Mark swallowed. That's not right. It is, I said calmly. The deed was amended years ago, after your first investment scare. Remember? His face drained of color. I continued, my voice steady, practiced. The house cannot be sold without my written consent. It's listed as a protected marital asset. Any attempt to transfer ownership without approval triggers an automatic legal review. Ethan let out a sharp breath. So he can't sell it? No, I said. He can't. Mark flipped the page harder this time. What's this? That, I said, is the record of your unauthorized account transfers. Lauren stiffened. What transfers? Mark shot her a look. Stay out of this. Oh, she's very much in this, I replied. Those funds were moved to support plans you never disclosed. Plans that involved selling a home you don't legally control. Mark's voice dropped. You hired a lawyer. Yes. How long? He demanded. Long enough, I said. Long enough to understand exactly what I needed to protect. Lauren stood abruptly. You told me everything was handled. Mark turned on her. I said I was working on it. Her confidence cracked. You said Hazel wouldn't fight. I folded my hands. You mistook my silence for ignorance. Mark pulled out the final paper. His hands shook now. This is divorce paperwork. Filed, I corrected, and pre-approved. The room felt like it had lost its oxygen. You did this behind my back, he said. I nodded. The same way you did. Ethan stepped forward. Dad, you planned to sell Mom's home and walk out with her sister. What did you think would happen? Mark looked around the table, searching for support. There was none. Lauren's voice broke. What does this mean for us? I looked at her, not with anger but clarity. It means there is no us. Not in this house, not in this family. She shook her head, backing away. You promised, Mark cut her off. Just stop. That was the moment I knew their relationship wouldn't survive the truth. It had only existed in secrecy in the shadows of what they thought I didn't know. Mark dropped the papers onto the table. You planned this, he said quietly. Yes, I replied, because I refused to be displaced from my own life. He looked at the kids. I never wanted it to happen like this. Claire crossed her arms. You didn't want consequences. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Final silence. I stood once more, picked up my glass, and spoke evenly. This house is not for sale. I'm not leaving. And any further communication will go through my attorney. Mark didn't argue. He couldn't. Because the power he thought he had announced that night had already been taken from him carefully, legally, and without a single raised voice. And for the first time since Thanksgiving began, I felt something close to peace. The night didn't end with shouting. It ended with chairs scraping softly against the floor, half-eaten plates being cleared in silence, and the slow realization that nothing could be put back the way it was before. Mark didn't storm out. He didn't argue. He simply gathered his coat and keys like a man suddenly unsure where he belonged. I'll stay somewhere else tonight, he said, avoiding everyone's eyes. No one stopped him. Lauren lingered by the door, twisting her hands together. Hazel, I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. You knew exactly what you were doing, I said. And now you need to leave. She hesitated, then nodded, following Mark out into the cold evening air. The door closed behind them with a final, gentle click. That sound stayed with me. Ethan exhaled shakily. Mom, are you okay? I thought about the years I'd spent holding things together, about the plans I'd quietly made when something in my marriage stopped feeling safe, about the envelope that had waited patiently in my purse. I will be, I said. And so will you. The days that followed moved quickly and slowly at the same time. David filed the necessary motions. Temporary protections were put in place. The house, my home, was legally secured. Mark's access to shared accounts was limited until a full review could be completed. Everything happened through paperwork and phone calls, not raised voices. That mattered to me. Mark tried to reach out once. He left a voicemail saying he wanted to talk things through. David returned the call on my behalf. I never listened to the message. Claire stayed with me that week. We cooked together, watched old movies, talked late into the night about boundaries and respect, and the difference between love and entitlement. Ethan called every morning just to check in. I wasn't alone. A week later, Mark came by to collect the rest of his things. He moved carefully, like a guest in a space that no longer belonged to him. We didn't argue. We didn't reminisce. At the door, he paused. "You didn't have to humiliate me." I met his eyes. "You humiliated yourself," I said. "I just refused to disappear quietly." He nodded once and left. As for Lauren, she didn't call again. I heard through distant family that she'd moved away, chasing a version of freedom that didn't involve consequences. I wished her no harm, but I wished her no access to my life. The house felt different after that. Not emptier, quieter, safer. One evening, I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes that hadn't been touched on Thanksgiving. I looked around at the walls I'd painted, the shelves I'd built memories into, and I realized something important. This wasn't the place Mark had tried to sell. This was the place I had protected. And for the first time in a long time, I slept through the night. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in small, almost unnoticeable moments, waking up without dread, drinking coffee without checking my phone, realizing I could make plans without explaining myself to anyone. The house, once filled with tension I hadn't fully acknowledged, slowly became mine again. I rearranged the furniture first, not because it was necessary, but because it felt symbolic. I moved the armchair Mark used to claim into the corner near the window and placed a small desk there instead. It became my space. A place to read, to write, to think. A place where I could breathe. The kids noticed the change before I did. "You look lighter," Claire said one afternoon as we walked through the neighborhood, "like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." I smiled. "That's because I finally put it down." Ethan started coming by on Sundays, bringing takeout and questions about his own relationships. We talked honestly about red flags, about communication, about how love should never require someone to shrink themselves to survive. Those conversations mattered. They reminded me that what I had done wasn't just for me, it was for them too, for the example they would carry into their own lives. I also started volunteering quietly, without announcements, at a local support group for women navigating separation and financial uncertainty. I didn't tell my story in full. I didn't need to. Sometimes just sitting beside someone, listening without judgment, was enough. One woman asked me once, "How did you stay so calm when everything fell apart?" I thought about the envelope, the planning. The nights I cried alone, not knowing if I was being paranoid or perceptive. I wasn't calm, I said honestly. I was prepared. There's a difference. Mark faded into the background of my life. Necessary conversations were handled through lawyers. Emotions, once so loud, lost their urgency. Distance did what confrontation never could. It clarified. As winter settled over Oak Ridge, I decorated the house for the holidays again. Not to recreate what had been lost, but to honor what remained. Strength, family, self-respect. On a quiet evening in December, I sat by the window, watching snow fall gently over the street, and realized something unexpected. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was finally living it on my own terms. And that felt like freedom. People often ask how I managed not to fall apart that night. The truth is, I did fall apart, just not where anyone could see it. Strength doesn't always look like standing tall in public. Sometimes it looks like preparing quietly while the people around you underestimate your awareness. What Mark and Lauren never understood was this. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because I was paying attention. I learned that betrayal doesn't begin with an affair or an announcement. It begins when respect disappears and entitlement takes its place. When someone starts believing they can make decisions about your life without including you in them. I also learned that love without accountability isn't love. It's control wearing a friendly face. What saved me wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. Understanding my rights, protecting what I helped build, choosing legal protection over emotional chaos. The law didn't erase my pain, but it gave me structure when everything else felt unstable. It reminded me that dignity is not something someone can take from you without your permission. If there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this. Never confuse calm with ignorance. Never confuse patience with passivity. And never assume someone has nothing planned just because they aren't making noise. You don't owe anyone a dramatic reaction to justify your boundaries. You don't owe anyone access to your future just because they shared your past. Today, my home still stands. My children still walk through the door without fear or divided loyalties. And I wake up every morning knowing I chose myself not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. I didn't win because I hurt someone back. I won because I refused to disappear. And if you ever find yourself sitting at a table where your life is being discussed without your consent, remember this. You are allowed to stand up. You are allowed to protect yourself. And you are allowed to hand over the truth when the time is right. Sometimes, the most powerful response isn't a scream. It's an envelope.